Okay, so today we're going to dive into a pretty radical idea about influence. It's this concept that suggests pretty much everything we've been taught about persuasion is, well, it's just wrong. And it all comes down to what happens in the very first 90 seconds of any interaction.
So let me ask you a question, right? Where do you think influence really begins? I mean, the obvious answer, the one we all jump to, is that it starts when we open our mouths, right? When we start to speak and make our point. Well, what if I told you that's not just a little bit wrong, it's completely backward?
You see, real influence doesn't kick in with your words, it starts way earlier, down at the level of the nervous system. There's this tiny, unguarded window at the very beginning of an interaction where the other person is basically running on pure instinct. And that, right there, is where the game is won or lost. So this unguarded window lasts for about 90 seconds. And during that time, the other person's critical brain, the part that analyzes and argues, it isn't fully online yet. They're not picking apart your logic. They're just operating on raw pattern recognition, on gut feelings, on a vibe. This is your one and only window of opportunity.
Think about it like this. The human brain has a built-in order of operations when it meets someone new. First, it puts you in a box. It categorizes you. Then, based on that category, it decides how it feels about you. And only after those two things happen does it decide what ideas it's willing to accept from you. The secret isn't to fight this process, it's to masterfully ride it.
So the big question is, how do we actually do that? How do we ride the nervous system? Well, our source material lays out this incredible framework called the 90-second control map. It breaks that critical first minute and a half into 4 very specific, very crucial intervals that have to happen in order.
And here it is. This is the whole sequence laid out. You start with the authority imprint, then you create a novelty break, which leads to identity softening, and you finish with meaning capture. The key thing to get here is that you have to follow the sequence. If you miss a step, trying to get to the next one becomes exponentially harder, if not impossible. So in those first 10 seconds, the other person's brain is asking one simple question. Who are you? Leader or follower? Threat or non-threat? And it's deciding based purely on your nonverbals. Little anxious movements, adjusting your clothes, nodding too much, that premature smile. It all screams neediness. But controlled stillness, being relaxed, unhurried, that signals authority. It tells their brain that your internal world is calm and under control. All right, so once their brain has put you in the authority box, it expects you to follow a predictable social script. This is your moment to break that pattern. Maybe it's a slightly longer pause than is comfortable. Maybe it's an unexpected shift in your tone. Whatever it is, that little bit of novelty triggers something called an orienting response. It's an involuntary reflex that forces their brain to snap to attention and reevaluate everything. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. When you combine that initial signal of authority with this jolt of novelty, it creates a subtle state of uncertainty in the other person. And in that moment of uncertainty, their rigid sense of self, the whole I'm the kind of person who always thinks X, it starts to soften. The walls come down and your words begin to land with a weight they just wouldn't have otherwise. Now you're in the final stretch. You've established authority, their defenses are down. It's time to elevate. You have to shift the whole interaction from just being interesting to feeling fundamentally important. And you do this by raising the stakes. Maybe you share an uncomfortable but honest truth, or you make a surprisingly perceptive observation about them. This makes them lean in because their nervous system gets a powerful signal. Wow, this person actually sees me. Okay, so you've navigated the first 90 seconds perfectly. You've opened that window. Now what do? This is where language finally comes into play, but we need to think beyond just persuasion. The goal here is something much deeper, something called installation. See, persuasion is like knocking on the front door. You're trying to negotiate with their critical mind, and that process, by its very nature, creates resistance. Installation, on the other hand, is like finding a side door. It completely bypasses that critical filter and speaks directly to the little narrator inside their head, the voice that's always telling them their own story. When you can match that voice, your ideas don't get argued with, they just get absorbed. And to do this, our source lays out 5 categories of what it calls linguistic weapons. And don't let the name fool you, these are incredibly subtle tools. From things like scarcity whispers to identity installation, they are all designed to be completely invisible to the conscious mind and work directly on that internal narrator. This quote is a perfect example of identity installation. It's genius, right?
You're not telling them what to think. You're painting a picture of an aspirational identity, someone smart, perceptive, ahead of the curve, and then you're just letting them step into that picture themselves. It's incredibly powerful because it feels like their own realization, not your idea.
So what's the master key that makes all of these tools work? It's a principle called dissociation. Here's the rule. You never, ever aim your language directly at the person. Direct aim gets detected, and the second it's detected, resistance goes way up. Instead, you talk about some people, or you make observations about a certain type of situation. The listener's brain does the work of applying it to themselves, all while their guard is down.
Now, let's pull the lens back a bit. These principles aren't just about fleeting moments of influence. You can actually use them to systematically peel back the social masks that we all wear and build a truly genuine connection.
And that's where the deviant ladder comes in. It's got 5 rungs, and each rung represents a slightly deeper break from our unspoken social rules. You start small, like questioning some harmless norm. Then you move to sharing a criticism about the world. Then you admit a private truth, mention something a little taboo, and finally, you get to a real, intimate internal reveal. Each step is designed to get you past that protective social mask. But, and this is a big but, there's a catch. You can't just leap up the ladder. It's jarring. If you go from, say, a light complaint about traffic straight to a deep personal secret, it's going to set off all kinds of alarms. The other person's mask is going to snap right back on, and you've lost all the trust you just built.
So how do you move between the rungs smoothly? The solution is something called the permission bridge. And here's the crazy part. It has nothing to do with what you say. It's a nonverbal cue. It's a tiny micro moment where you shift your state. You slow down, maybe your voice gets a little quieter. You might even look down for a second like you're deciding if you should really say what's next. That little signal tells their nervous system, it's okay, it's safe to go deeper with me.
And that right there, that idea of safety and state, brings us to what is easily the most important piece of this entire puzzle. It's the foundation that makes everything else actually work.
You absolutely cannot fake this stuff. You can't just perform vulnerability. You can't pretend to be congruent. If you try to use these external tools without having done the real internal work to understand yourself, they won't just fail. They will backfire spectacularly and expose you as completely inauthentic.
And this is the reason why. Think about it. Politeness is often just a socially acceptable way to be a little bit deceptive, right? It signals that an interaction is low risk. But truth, especially an uncomfortable truth shared in a moment of vulnerability, signals something so much more profound. It creates a depth of safety and real connection that surface-level politeness can't even begin to touch. So I'll just leave you with this final thought to chew on. If a lot of what we call politeness is really just a way to avoid being truly authentic, what's the truth that you're not sharing in your own conversations? And what do you think might change if you started to?